Bristol NUJ, National Union of Journalists, who has organised this evening in conjunction with the Festival of Ideas and two media charities, Media Act and MediaWise. We're doing this because we recognise that journalism has acquired an even worse reputation over the last year, and we want to try to do something about it by discussing what's gone wrong. And we've got a fantastic panel, including Chris Jeffries, who suffered trial by tabloid, which no one should really have to suffer. But I'll hand over to Donovan DeLong, who's the NUJ's National President, to introduce the panel to you.
Okay, welcome everybody. A really important thing at the very beginning, if anyone's been watching the pre-tweeting, there was a fairly long hashtag. We've shortened that a bit, so the hashtag for tonight is #Benn2012, BENN. So if you want to tweet, you can get a connection in the room. That's what to use. So this event is going to be broken up into two sections. The first section, we're going to kind of update you on what's been going on at the Leveson inquiry. We have Porthilio-Shrimpton here from the Hacked Off campaign, who's been following what's been going on at Leveson to get you up to date. And then there'll be a bit of a local focus. As you can see, we have Chris Jeffries here, who's going to talk about his experiences. Then we have Mike Norton, the editor of the Bristol Evening Post, and then Steve Brodie from Points West. Then we'll have some questions from yourselves, so you get a chance to ask all of the panelists about any issues that you think they haven't addressed or that you'd like to know more about. And then we'll move on to kind of look at the broader issue, and particularly we'll have a bit of a look at somebody with experience of working for one of the tabloid newspapers, which is Richard Pepiat, formerly of the Daily Star. You may have read some stuff that he's written and said a few months ago when he left the newspaper. And then we have Lord Hunt, who was the chair of the PCC until recently, and who's obviously involved in looking at what comes next. So just to kind of introduce where the NUJ fits into a lot of this, a piece I wrote in July for The Guardian argued that the NUJ could have saved the news of the world. The NUJ is not just a trade union, but it is of course a trade union. We fight for the wages, payment and condition of working journalists. We're also a body that actually focuses on the ethics of journalism and tries to ensure that our members carry out ethical journalism. What happened in relation to the News of the World and the rest of News International is that we were locked out of the building 25 years ago on the walking street. And as a result, the union had no role protecting journalists from the pressures of their editors demanding the kind of practices that we now all know were going on in that paper and possibly other papers for years. So the reason the NUJ has become so central to this argument, and thankfully a lot of the media are now focusing on the NUJ and the NUJ's role, and a lot more journalists, particularly those working for News International, are coming to the NUJ for help, is that actually we have the possibility of presenting an alternative to power within media organisations. The ability to stand up for working journalists, stand up for ethical practice, and hopefully to be able to improve the media and give everybody the media that they deserve. So with that, I'll hand over to Tice, who will tell us how things have been going at Leveson Inquiry.
Thank you, Don. I prepared a speech which I hope is not too long for you, but in terms of the Leveson Inquiry, I mean, we've already had, we have Module 1, which focused on the relationship between the press and the public. So we heard from victims, victims of press abuse, some victims of phone hacking, people who've had libel cases, cases of breach of privacy, and we've heard from newspaper editors, and then we moved on to Module 2, which is now looking at the relationship between the press and the police. It's obviously slightly constrained by the fact that the investigations are still going on, but we were in the middle of this module at the moment. It's heard from former Metropolitan Police senior officers, it's heard from crime reporters so far, and it's pretty much still going on carefully so as not to prejudice any of the prejudice the police investigation. So I'm just going to go into my speech now, which I prepared So what I wanted to say is that journalism is not under attack by the so-called safety first brigade in this country. The industry is not ready to collapse under the weight of the findings of the Leveson inquiry or this fictional chilling effect those with a political agenda insist is emanating from it. The reality is that for at least a decade now, if not two, journalism has been giving way to commercial advantage, profit, and happiness of shareholders in the biggest publishing companies operating in this country. Take the local and regional press, for example. At local newspapers today, what was meant to be the single most important activity has now become a luxury. It is a luxury, as I was more than once told by my former bosses at News Press London, to have a fully staffed newsroom. But without a fully staffed newsroom, local authorities cannot be held to account, and local communities effectively lose their right to know, because there is no one there to tell them what is really going on. It is a luxury for a free local weekly title to have 20 pages of editorial content. It is a luxury to have enough reporters so the courts get covered and justice is seen to be done. It is a luxury for a reporter to be the eyes and ears of the public because she or he is not allowed to leave the newsroom to go after stories. It is a luxury for this industry today to have journalists doing what journalists are supposed to do, because the industry is being crunched by the need for exorbitant profit and a lack of regard for real journalism. The scenario is not different to national newspapers. During his evidence at the Leveson inquiry, the proprietor of Express and Star newspapers, Richard Desmond, was asked, apart from it being a business opportunity, is there anything else which attracted you to the idea of being a newspaper proprietor? And his answer was no. He then went on to say he was not an editorial man, he was an advertising man. The fact that journalism is not the most important activity that goes on in a newspaper these days is not a symptom of the decline of this industry. It is one of the causes of this decline. As a former news reporter, now also working as editor of the Hacked Off campaign website on the coverage of the inquiry and the phone hacking scandal as a whole, it breaks my heart to see what's happening to the industry. Not only because the trade I love so much seems to become a secondary piece in the well-oiled profit-making machinery of the industry, but because the effects of this have been devastating. Take all the alleged criminal activity at News International. Take the industrial-scale illegal data mining uncovered by Operation Motorman. The former Information Commissioner himself admitted there was very little information on private investigator Steve Whittemore's files that could have been requested by journalists with the intention of writing stories in the public interest. Take the utter and complete arrogance of editors who even ignore the law of the land to write sensational stories about Christopher Jeffries, a man arrested on suspicion of murder, then released without charge and later proven innocent. And Mr. Jeffries is only one of many examples of this loss of perspective by journalists working for certain sections of the British press. Journalism is a service. It is a service to the public. If journalists and newspapers are going to raise that flag and say they need to be free to expose wrongdoing, then they also need to be free from the shackles of commercial pressure and proprietorial influence. Only then they will be truly able to hold the powers that be to account and fulfill this role, which is vital in a democratic society. Let's look at the example of the Mail Online, which is, in my opinion, the news equivalent of a battery farm. It is very successful, indeed. It has millions of readers. However, only a small portion of its stories is republished from the newspaper. The majority of stories are a rehash of press releases or of stories that have appeared in other newspapers. Talented, promising reporters sit there day and night doing long shifts without producing even one line of original content. They are not doing journalism. They're being turned into professional rewriters and uploaders. I happen to know one reporter who has been working there for years and is now ready to quit. Not just the Mail Online, but the industry altogether, because they are utterly disenchanted with it. When there is no room for real journalism to be carried out in one of the wealthiest newspaper publishers in this country, one has to ask, what has become of journalism? The Hacked Off campaign is sometimes accused of trying to muzzle the press or of wanting to see the demise of newspapers in the UK. Well, for a start, neither statement is true. The press should be free to go after stories. Journalists should be free to follow their instincts and break the law if it turns out something worrying, hypocritical, or outrageous needs to be exposed to the public. However, if they abuse their freedom in order to make up stories because it doesn't matter if they're true, and those stories end up causing unbelievable damage to an individual, then their behaviour should be challenged. Why should journalists and newspapers be allowed to wield the power to destroy an individual's life and go unpunished? In Mr. Jeffrey's case, he won redress from the courts, and with the Levison inquiry and the work of our campaign, he has been able to slowly raise the false image of him created by some newspapers. However, many others, like Margaret and James Watson, whose son committed suicide, clutching a couple of inaccurate articles published about their murdered daughter, will never be able to get any adequate redress. Their pain cannot and will not be relieved by corrections and clarifications following. The answer is not to constrain the freedom of the press. We need free journalists. We need to free journalists up to do journalism. For as long as we have reporters forced to write untrue stories by their editors and being put under great pressure to deliver stories fast, with no regard for accuracy, this industry is going to continue to decline. For as long as we have reporters who are bullied into harassing bereaved families and individuals suffering from mental health issues for the sake of writing a sensational story which does not expose hypocrisy, wrongdoing, crime or deceit, there is no fixing this mess we're in. We also need to consider the landscape of publishing has completely changed in the past 10 years. We are all publishers now. Some of us only subject to the law of the land, others subject to the law of the land, and to a failed system of self-regulation, which has been nothing more than a self-serving system of mediation. We need an all-encompassing system of regulation, of self-regulation even, one that is not just an upper-class old gentleman's club for the biggest newspaper publishers in this country, but where everyone is a part of it, and where all have responsibilities and rights. This is how we will foster an environment where the press can be challenging, rich, bold, and at times irresponsible, but for reasons that are indisputable. That's what a free press should be like.